Before we start this heartwarming story, let us know where you're watching from in comment below. And if you like this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. Have a wonderful day. Let's enjoy this video. She was crying on her apartment floor, heart shattered, love lost, and judged for who she dared to care for. In a moment of pain, she sent a message meant for her father, but it reached someone else, a lonely millionaire hundreds of miles away, who had no idea that text would change everything. Rain whispered against the glass of Grace Miller's small apartment window, but inside her world was screaming. She sat on the floor, wrapped in an oversized sweater that still smelled like her now ex-boyfriend. The silence in the room was the kind that doesn't comfort, it accused. It made her feel smaller, like every piece of her had been chipped away one painful word at a time. Just an hour ago, she had argued with her mother again. The same exhausting fight, the same words thrown like knives. "He doesn't belong in this family," her mom had snapped, eyes cold, mouth bitter. "He loves me," Grace had begged, voice trembling with hope she was losing by the second. But love, it seemed, wasn't enough. Not for people who still judged others by the color of their skin instead of the contents of their heart. And now he was gone too. "He's right," she whispered to the empty room. "It is too hard." He had said it gently, but it cut like a scream. "I can't keep doing this, Grace. It's not just your mom. It's the looks, the whispers. I love you, but I'm tired." So he walked away, and she was left with nothing but the sound of her own breathing and the weight of not being enough. Not for him, not for her family, not even for herself. Her chest ached, not just emotionally, but physically, like her heart was truly breaking. She had read about heartbreak feeling like drowning. They were right. Grace wiped her tears with the back of her sleeve, but they kept coming. It wasn't just about the breakup, it was about all the moments that came before it. Every time she tried to explain her heart to someone who refused to listen. Every time she had to defend love like it was a crime. She needed someone. Just one person who would understand. Shaking, she reached for her phone. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard, hesitating, as if even texting would betray her emotions too honestly. Finally, she typed, "I'm tired, Dad. I'm tired of being judged for who I love. I just want someone who stays." Her thumb lingered over the send button. She didn't want to cry anymore. She didn't want to beg for understanding. She just wanted to be heard. She hit send. A small breath escaped her lips, like maybe, just maybe, someone would finally understand. She tossed the phone onto the couch and leaned her head against the wall, eyes closed, letting the silence settle again. But she didn't know what had just happened. One wrong digit, one simple, tiny mistake. The text didn't go to her dad. It went to a complete stranger. In another state, far from her quiet Ohio apartment, Ethan Carter was pouring himself a glass of wine, staring out at the city lights through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his apartment. He hadn't planned to check his phone. It had been a long day. Meetings, decisions, loneliness. But the buzz on the counter made him glance. He picked up the phone and read the message. "I'm tired, Dad. I'm tired of being judged for who I love. I just want someone who stays." His hand froze, the wine glass half raised. Something about the words hit him like a punch to the chest. They weren't meant for him. That was obvious. But they felt like they could have been. The heartbreak in the message, it was raw. Real. Ethan stared at the screen for a long time, the message still glowing softly in his hand. He didn't know who Dad was. He didn't know Grace Miller, but suddenly he wanted to. Back in Ohio, Grace lay down on the floor, the tears now dry on her cheeks but the pain still alive in her chest. She didn't know that someone, somewhere, had just read her heart. She didn't know that her world was about to change. That love, unexpected, uninvited, and entirely unplanned, was already on its way to her, sparked not by a perfect plan, but by a perfectly broken moment, all because of a wrong number and a heart that needed to be heard. The evening had settled softly over Chicago, wrapping the quiet suburbs in a velvet hush. Inside his modern but uncomfortably neat apartment, Ethan Carter sat at the edge of his mahogany dining table, a half-eaten plate of roasted chicken growing cold before him. He wasn't hungry. Not really. Most nights, food was routine, something to fill the silence. The TV murmured in the background, playing some cooking show he wasn't watching. The only sound louder than the narrator's voice was the ticking of the antique clock on the wall. His late father's. Its rhythmic talk reminded him, minute by minute, that time was passing. But he didn't feel like he was going anywhere. At 34, Ethan had everything that should have made him feel fulfilled. A successful online tech business, a cozy home, a sleek car parked outside. His bank account was comfortable, more than comfortable. But none of that could wrap its arms around him at the end of the day. None of it whispered, "I'm glad you're home." He had grown used to being alone, too used to it maybe. His phone buzzed against the table, snapping him out of the gray fog in his mind. He expected a work email, maybe a shipping update, something forgettable. But as he picked it up, the screen lit up with words that stopped his heart. "I'm tired, Dad. I'm tired of being judged for who I love. I just want someone who stays." He read it once, then again, and again. A message clearly not meant for him, and yet it felt like it was for him. There was something raw in it, something too real to ignore. He stared at the screen for a full minute, heart thudding in his chest. He imagined the person on the other end, probably curled up somewhere, crying, probably shaking as they hit send, probably needing someone to say something, anything. He could have ignored it. Most people would. But Ethan wasn't most people. Not anymore. Not after losing both of his parents 3 years ago in that icy car crash that left him numb for months. Not after spending birthdays alone, watching people laugh from his window. He swallowed and slowly typed a reply. "I think you sent this to the wrong number, but I'm here, and I'm listening." He paused. Should he send it? Would it make things worse? But something deeper whispered, "Do it." He hit send, then silence. He stared at the screen, watching the typing bubble that never came. Part of him wondered if the person on the other end was reading it, if they were okay, if maybe, just maybe, they were hoping someone would reply. Minutes passed like hours. Then suddenly his phone buzzed again. "Sorry, I didn't mean to bother you." The words were shy, embarrassed, but honest. Ethan smiled softly. There was something in that message, in that hesitation, that made his chest tighten. He replied without thinking, "You didn't. Maybe we both needed someone tonight." He looked down at the screen, his thumb still hovering. His heart thumped in a way he hadn't felt in years. Not from romance, but connection. Back in Ohio, Grace stared at her phone in confusion. Who was this guy? He wasn't her dad, but his words, they felt safe. She should have stopped replying. She didn't know him. It was late. It was weird. But something told her, stay in the conversation. So she sent another message. "Are you sure? I'm kind of a mess right now." Ethan's reply came almost instantly. "Everyone's a mess sometimes. That doesn't mean they don't deserve to be heard." Grace's fingers trembled. She hadn't expected kindness from a stranger. She had barely found it in people she knew. And now, here it was. Soft, steady, asking for nothing. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her face. But he wasn't running away. He was listening. She curled deeper into her blanket, a little less alone than she had been 10 minutes ago. Ethan leaned back in his chair, the forgotten food now ice cold. For the first time in a long time, he felt something warm in his chest, something alive. That night they kept texting, slowly, cautiously, like walking barefoot across glass, not rushing, not diving in, just two hearts, miles apart, meeting gently in the middle of heartbreak. He asked if she was okay. She said she wasn't sure. She asked why he replied. He said, "Because silence hurts." When they finally said goodnight, it wasn't a goodbye. It was a see you later. Neither of them knew what would come next, but in a world full of broken promises and silent phones, two people had found something rare, a moment of kindness from a complete stranger. And sometimes that's all it takes to change everything. One wrong number, one right heart. The first few nights were careful, Polite texts, soft words, conversations that tiptoed around the edges of their real lives. But slowly something shifted. Ethan and Grace began to look forward to the buzz of their phones each evening. It was no longer just a coincidence or an act of kindness. It became a rhythm, a quiet promise whispered between two aching hearts. Every night at around 9 p.m., Grace would curl into her blanket, light a candle on her bedside table, and wait for Ethan's message. Sometimes it was just a simple, "Hey, how was today?" Other nights it started with a memory or a quote, or even just a random joke to make her laugh. And she did laugh. Not the fake, tired laugh she gave to coworkers or relatives. This one came from her chest. It sounded like hope. Ethan, sitting in his kitchen with a mug of peppermint tea, would smile every time her name lit up on his screen. She was a stranger technically, but she already felt more familiar than anyone in his real life. They talked about everything. Grace told him about her favorite music, soft indie songs, love ballads that told stories in whispers. Ethan sent her voice notes of himself trying to sing them, off-key, full of charm. She told him she loved his voice, even when it cracked. He told her about how he learned to cook after his mother passed away, how chopping vegetables made him feel close to her. She told him about the time she burned microwave popcorn so badly her fire alarm went off, and slowly they peeled away their layers. Ethan admitted something he had never told anyone, that he used to be ignorant, that he grew up in a family where prejudice was disguised as tradition, that he believed those things until he left home, until he saw the world for himself, until he realized love had no color, no race, only heart. He typed the words nervously. "I used to be blind, Grace, but I changed because I had to, because I wanted to." There was a pause before her reply came. "But you did change," she wrote. "That matters. That's rare." She didn't hold his past against him. Grace told him about her loneliness, how loving someone who looked different than her brought on a weight she never expected, how people stared at them in restaurants, how her family never said the cruel things outright, but said just enough to make it feel like she had to choose between love and peace. "I never stopped believing in love," she admitted, "even when it felt like no one else believed in mine." Their chats grew longer. Late nights turned into early mornings. They started calling. At first, the sound of each other's voices made them both nervous. Grace would play with the edge of her pillow, heart fluttering, while Ethan paced his living room with a silly smile, trying to sound casual. One night, her voice cracked while telling him about an old birthday, one where she cried in the bathroom because her boyfriend couldn't come inside her house. Her parents didn't say it out loud, but their silence screamed everything. "I felt like I was wrong," she whispered, "like love made me dirty." Ethan didn't speak for a moment. Then softly he said, "Grace, I wish I could have been there. I would have held your hand right in front of them." She didn't cry, not that time, but her silence was soaked with gratitude. They moved on to FaceTime. Their first video call lasted 4 hours. When her face first appeared on his screen, lit by soft fairy lights, Ethan couldn't speak. His breath caught in his throat. Her eyes were tired but kind, like she'd lived 100 lifetimes in one. Her hair was messy from the pillow, and she was wearing an old sweatshirt. But to him, she looked like peace. He smiled, finally finding his words. "You're the most beautiful voice I've ever heard." Grace blushed, half hiding her face with the blanket. "You haven't even seen me properly yet." "I don't need to," he said. "You could never hide from me." She giggled softly, the kind of laugh that only slips out when you trust someone enough to be silly again. Then she whispered something that caught him off guard. "You make me feel safe, Ethan, and I don't even know what your smile looks like in person." He leaned closer to the camera, smiled wide, and said, "Well, then I guess I'll just have to show you soon." They both paused. That unspoken line between strangers and something more had quietly vanished. It wasn't a crush. It wasn't fantasy. It was slow trust, fragile honesty, and the kind of warmth that only shows up when two people finally stop pretending to be fine. Grace didn't know how to name it. Neither did Ethan. But they both felt it. That electric, aching pull that happens when two souls meet at the exact moment they were supposed to. And even though they hadn't touched, hadn't stood in the same room, hadn't looked into each other's eyes without a screen between them. Something real had already begun. 2 months had passed, but to Grace and Ethan, it felt like a lifetime lived in late-night calls, shared laughter, and whispered fears beneath warm blankets and glowing screens. They knew each other now, not in the shallow, surface way people know names or jobs, but in that rare, soul-touched way that comes only when two people choose to show their cracks and love each other more for them. Ethan knew the way Grace's voice went soft when she was tired. He knew that she drank her coffee with too much sugar and played with her sleeve when she was nervous. Grace knew the way Ethan paused before sharing something vulnerable, how he read old poetry on sleepless nights, and that he secretly feared he'd never be enough for someone. And then, one night, his voice came through the phone. Gentle but sure. "Grace," he said, "I want to see you. If you'll let me." She held her breath. This was the moment where fantasy met the edge of reality, where FaceTime screens would fade into face-to-face, where silence would be filled with heartbeats, footsteps, maybe even that first terrifying, beautiful touch. "I want that too," she whispered. "I really do." He smiled, and just like that, the plan was set. No grand gestures, no five-star hotels, no private jets, though Ethan could have easily arranged it. Instead, he packed a small weekend bag, filled his car's gas tank, and drove the 6-hour stretch from the quiet suburbs of Chicago to Grace's tiny Ohio town, each mile thick with nerves and hope. He didn't blast music. He didn't call anyone. He just drove with the windows cracked open and the sound of her voice playing in his memory like a melody he never wanted to forget. Back in Ohio, Grace stood in front of her mirror for what felt like hours. She tried on 3 different outfits before finally choosing her soft gray sweater and a pair of jeans that made her feel like herself. Not someone trying to impress, just someone hoping to be seen. She lit the candle he once said he liked, lavender and vanilla, and made tea she hoped he'd actually enjoy. And then the doorbell rang. She froze. Every second between the chime and her fingers turning the knob felt like a chapter of a different book. Her lungs tightened. Her heart raced. She opened the door. Time didn't just slow. It stopped. There he was, taller than she expected, broader. He wore a navy coat that fit snug around his shoulders, and his hair was slightly tousled from the wind. But what caught her most were his eyes. Kind, honest, and quietly filled with everything he had never dared say out loud. "You really came," she breathed, voice barely above a whisper. Ethan smiled, a smile that made her knees soften. He stepped closer, so gently, like he didn't want to rush this moment. His hand came up, slow, respectful, and he tucked a single strand of hair behind her ear. His voice was soft, almost reverent. "I told you I would." She blinked, her eyes already glossy. Then, without another word, they moved toward each other, and he wrapped his arms around her. Not like someone claiming her, but like someone returning to her. It wasn't a rushed hug. It was the kind that makes you exhale a breath you didn't know you were holding. They stood there, holding each other in the doorway. Two strangers no longer. Eventually, she pulled him inside, and they both laughed nervously, like teenagers on a first date. They sat on her tiny couch, shoulder to shoulder, knees brushing now and then. She poured them both tea and added too much honey to his. He didn't complain, just smiled and drank it like it was perfect. Conversation came easy, even with their cheeks flushed and hearts pounding. They talked about how weird it was to finally be in the same room, about the drive, the nerves, the thrill of not knowing what came next. At one point, Grace got up to grab a blanket, and when she returned, Ethan gently pulled it over both of them. His arm rested behind her, not possessively, just there, warm and solid, a quiet shield against the world. And then, it happened. Not like in the movies. There were no violins, no fireworks, just a long pause in the conversation, a quiet moment where the world outside didn't exist. Grace looked up at him, eyes searching, unsure. Ethan turned his face just slightly, his gaze locked onto hers. No asking, no performance, just a lean in, a slow, careful closing of space. And then a kiss, software, slow, delicate. It wasn't a kiss that begged for more. It was one that said, I see you. You're safe. When they pulled back, Grace's eyes were shimmering. Ethan rested his forehead against hers. That, he whispered, was worth the wait. She smiled, a small, overwhelmed smile, and tucked herself against his shoulder. And for the first time in a long, long time, neither of them felt alone. The night rolled on with quiet laughter, shared glances, and stolen touches that didn't ask for anything but presence. Outside, the wind blew. Inside, two people, once strangers brought together by accident, now sat wrapped in warmth, daring to believe in something more. And maybe, just maybe, love had come home. There were no fireworks, no dramatic declarations, no paparazzi outside her window. Just life, soft, slow, and suddenly filled with warmth. Ethan began visiting more often. At first, just on weekends. Then sometimes during the week too, sneaking in a night when his work allowed. Grace didn't mind the clutter of an extra toothbrush in her bathroom or his coffee mug left by the sink. Those little signs of him being there made the space feel more alive, like the walls were finally breathing again. Their time together wasn't grand, it was ordinary. Gloriously, beautifully ordinary. They made breakfast together on sleepy Sundays. She'd scramble eggs while he sliced avocados, the radio humming in the background. Sometimes he'd hum along, off beat, and she'd laugh. Not because he was bad, but because he didn't care that he was. They danced in her kitchen, not to impress, not to show off. Just barefoot, spinning around the tiled floor in pajamas, holding each other like it was the most natural thing in the world. Rain would often tap gently against the windows, as if the sky itself was leaning in to listen. They watched old movies on her couch, black and white ones, the kind with soft music and slow-burn love stories. She'd fall asleep sometimes, her head resting on his chest, and he wouldn't move, not even an inch. He'd hum along offbeat and she'd laugh. Not because he was bad, but because he didn't care that he was. They danced in her kitchen, not to impress, not to show off, just barefoot, spinning around the tiled floor in pajamas, holding each other like it was the most natural thing in the world. Rain would often tap gently against the windows, as if the sky itself was leaning in to listen. They watched old movies on her couch, black and white ones, the kind with soft music and slow-burn love stories. She'd fall asleep sometimes, her head resting on his chest, and he wouldn't move, not even an inch. He'd just sit there holding her, listening to the sound of her breathing, thinking to himself, so this is what peace feels like. He started leaving little notes around her apartment, a sticky note on her mirror. You are more than enough. A folded paper in her book. I love how your laugh surprises even you. A scribbled line in her kitchen. Don't forget how strong you are. Grace would find them at random moments and smile, her heart filling, not from the words, but from the care. One rainy evening in early spring, they went for a walk. It had started out dry, the clouds hanging low but not yet bursting. They strolled hand in hand through her neighborhood, her umbrella tilted to cover both of them, their fingers laced together. The drizzle came slowly, soft and cool, and they didn't rush. They just kept walking, talking about dreams, about maybe moving someday, about a bakery she always wanted to open, about a quiet house with windows that let the morning sun flood in. But Grace's heart was heavy that night. The soft joy of their walk couldn't quiet a whisper of doubt that still lingered deep down. As they turned the corner toward home, she stopped walking. The street was empty except for the sound of rain on pavement and distant wind chimes. She looked up at him. Ethan, she said, her voice gentle but unsure, do you ever wish I was someone easier? His brow furrowed. What do you mean? She looked away, swallowed hard. Someone your family would have approved of. Someone without the baggage. Someone they wouldn't have stared at or questioned or judged. Silence fell between them. The kind that doesn't hurt, but waits. Then Ethan reached out, took her face in both his hands, not forcefully, but with that quiet kind of tenderness that makes you want to cry and laugh at the same time. His thumbs brushed the raindrops from her cheeks. Grace, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You're not difficult. You're not baggage. You're real. You make me better. Her eyes filled. She blinked slowly, not even trying to hide the tears anymore. I spent years surrounded by people who smiled through fake lives. You walk into a room and you're yourself. Raw, loving, honest. I don't want easy. I want you. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. She didn't need to say anything, because in the next second he kissed her. Not like their first kiss. This one was deeper, slow, certain, the kind of kiss that silences every insecurity, every fear. A kiss that didn't ask for permission, but gave it freely. I see you. I choose you. The rain kept falling. Their clothes were damp, their hair sticking to their faces, but neither of them moved to go inside. They stood there in the middle of the quiet street, wrapped in each other's arms. Two people who had learned to love in the shadows, now daring to stand in the light. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the whispers, not the past, not the world outside. Just this, her hands against his chest, his arms around her waist, and a love growing in the quiet between breaths. They walked home soaked, laughing like children. She made tea. He dried her hair with a towel, gently, like she might break. And as they curled up on the couch, tangled in warmth and quiet smiles, Grace whispered something against his shoulder. I'm not scared anymore. Ethan kissed the top of her head. You never had to be. A year passed, quietly, sweetly, not marked by grand milestones, but by tiny, unshakable moments that stitched two hearts into one life. Ethan didn't ask Grace to move in with him. He didn't whisk her away to Chicago. Instead, he brought his bags and his heart into her small Ohio apartment, where laughter already lived in the walls and the scent of lavender candles lingered in the air. I don't want a mansion, he told her, setting his suitcase down with a grin. I want you. Wherever you are, that's home. They didn't hire decorators or designers. They did it themselves, together. On the first weekend, they painted the walls a soft off-white, freshening up the space and letting sunlight bounce brighter through the windows. Their hands got covered in paint, and so did their clothes, until they collapsed onto the tarp-covered floor, giggling and kissing, leaving accidental fingerprints on each other's cheeks. They built bookshelves with wood Ethan picked out from the local hardware store, even though he had no idea what he was doing. Grace read the instructions. He pretended to listen. In the end, it stood a little crooked, but proudly, lovingly, holding their favorite novels and little trinkets from flea markets they visited hand in hand. They cooked side by side almost every night now. Grace still scrambled the eggs and Ethan still sang off-key. She no longer rolled her eyes. She joined in. Their couch became sacred. It wasn't just furniture. It was a sanctuary. They'd curl up every evening after dinner, under a shared blanket. Grace tucked against his chest as the TV played old black and white movies or random documentaries they barely followed. And when they were quiet, they talked. Not just about the day, but about everything. What scared them, what healed them, what kind of future they dared to dream of. But even as their love grew, something lingered like a shadow in the background. Her mother. Grace hadn't spoken much to her mom since that night a year ago. The silence between them had been heavy. Awkward holidays passed with only brief texts, but slowly Grace started opening that door again. One day she told her mom, Ethan's in my life now, and he's not going anywhere. You don't have to approve, but I hope someday you'll want to understand. Her mother said nothing. Weeks passed. Then one Sunday afternoon, there was a knock at the door. It was her mom. She brought cookies, awkwardly, and stood at the threshold like a woman not sure if she was welcome in her own daughter's new world. Ethan opened the door. He didn't force charm. He didn't try to impress. He just smiled gently and said, Hi. I've heard a lot about you. Would you like to come in? The visit was quiet, tense at first, but Grace watched as Ethan offered her mom tea, asked about her garden, and listened without pushing. And over time, days, then weeks, then months, something changed. Her mom saw it. She saw the way Ethan looked at Grace like she was art and sunlight and safety all at once. How he listened, how he helped, how he cared without making it a performance. And the walls she'd built, those walls of fear, ignorance, and misunderstanding began to crack. They didn't crumble in a single day, but they softened. One morning, after a long visit filled with cautious warmth, her mother hugged Grace before leaving and said, "He's good to you. That's what matters." Grace cried in the kitchen after she left, tears not of pain, but of hope. One night, months later, as she lay beside Ethan in bed, the rain falling gently outside like it had the night they first kissed, she whispered something she'd never said out loud before. "You were never a mistake," she said, tracing circles on his chest with her fingertip. "That wrong number, it saved my life." Ethan smiled, not with surprise, but with the kind of smile that knows the truth, deeply, fully. He kissed her forehead and replied in that soft, steady voice that had calmed her soul since day one. "You were the message I didn't know I needed." The world outside still had its opinions. There were still looks, still whispers sometimes, but they didn't care, because they had built something stronger, not a castle with high walls, but a home with open windows and light in every corner. A love that didn't need to be loud to be real. A life that began not with perfection, but with a simple mistake that turned out to be everything right. And in a world that sometimes judged love by appearances, they lived as proof that real love, the kind that heals, the kind that stays, has no color, no boundary, and no shame. Only truth, only grace, only a new kind of home.